Once upon a time, deep in the heart of a dense forest, there stood an old, dilapidated hut. The hut was made of rotting wood and had a thatched roof, which had long since fallen into disrepair. The windows were broken, and the door hung off its hinges. Despite its decrepit appearance, the hut had a strange, eerie allure that drew in unsuspecting travelers. One night, a group of friends decided to spend the night in the hut as a dare. They had heard the rumors of the hut being haunted, but they didn't believe in ghosts. They laughed and joked as they set up camp inside the hut. But as the night progressed, the temperature dropped and a thick mist rolled in, enveloping the forest in an eerie blanket of fog. The friends soon realized that they were not alone in the hut. They heard strange noises coming from the shadows, whispers, moans, and the sound of shuffling feet. They tried to ignore it, telling themselves it was just their imagination. But as the night grew darker, the noises grew louder and more persistent. One of the friends, a young woman named Sarah, decided to investigate. She grabbed a flashlight and ventured into the shadows. She soon discovered that the hut was not empty, but inhabited by the spirits of the previous occupants who had died there. They were trapped, unable to move on to the afterlife because of the evil that had once taken residence in the hut. Sarah was terrified and ran back to her friends, but they didn't believe her. They thought she was just trying to scare them. But as the night went on, the spirits grew more and more aggressive, throwing objects and causing the hut to shake. The friends were trapped, and they knew they had to get out before it was too late. In a desperate attempt to escape, the friends managed to break down the door and flee into the foggy forest. But the spirits were not done with them yet. As they ran, they could hear the spirits' screams and laughter echoing through the trees, chasing them until they finally reached the safety of their car. As the friends were running away from the hut, the rain began to pour down heavily, drenching them to the bone. The sound of the raindrops hitting the leaves of the trees made it difficult for them to hear anything else, but they knew the spirits were still chasing them. As they reached their car, one of the friends suddenly disappeared, snatched away by the spirits. The remaining friends searched frantically for their missing companion, but it was as if they had vanished into thin air. With no other choice, they piled into the car and tried to start it, but it wouldn't budge. They soon realized that the spirits had tampered with the engine, trapping them in the forest. The friends huddled together in the car, trying to come up with a plan as the spirits closed in on them. Suddenly, they heard a voice calling out to them. It was the voice of their missing friend, but it was coming from inside the car. They looked around frantically, but there was no one there. Then they heard the voice again, coming from the back seat. They slowly turned around to see their missing friend, possessed by the spirits and with eyes that glowed with an otherworldly light. The friends screamed in terror as the possessed friend lunged at them. They managed to push him out of the car and make a run for it. But the spirits were still hot on their heels. They could feel the cold, ghostly hands of the spirits reaching out to grab them, pulling them back into the darkness of the forest. As the friends ran through the forest, the rain continued to pour down heavily, making it difficult for them to see where they were going. They could hear the spirits getting closer and closer, their screams and moans growing louder. Suddenly, they stumbled upon an old well hidden behind a wall of thick foliage. Without hesitation, they jumped in, hoping to escape the spirits. The well was deep and dark, the only light coming from a small opening at the top. They could hear the spirits still following them, their screams echoing through the well. They huddled together, trying to keep each other calm as the spirits closed in. But as the spirits reached the well, they suddenly stopped. The friends could hear them whispering to each other in a language they couldn't understand. Suddenly, the well began to shake, as if something was trying to break through from below. The friends could feel the cold, damp air getting colder, and they knew they were in grave danger. Just when they thought it was over, they saw a light coming from the bottom of the well. It was faint at first, but it got brighter and brighter until it was blinding. They had to shield their eyes as the light grew more intense. When the light finally dissipated, they were no longer in the well. They were in a different place, a place filled with darkness and cold. They looked around, trying to find a way out, but they were lost. Suddenly, they heard a voice calling out to them. It was the voice of their missing friend. They followed the voice, but it was leading them deeper into the darkness. As they walked, the darkness began to clear, and they found themselves in an open field. In the distance, they could see a figure standing, and as they got closer, they realized it was their missing friend. But this time, his eyes were no longer glowing, and he had a calm expression. He told them that they were safe, that the spirits had taken them to another realm, a realm where souls were trapped, and that he had been freed from the possession. He also warned them that they should never return to the forest or the well, or they would be trapped in that realm forever. The friends were in shock. They couldn't believe what they were hearing. They asked their friend how he managed to escape the spirit's grasp, but he could only tell them that he had been saved by an unknown force. He urged them to leave that place as soon as possible. They didn't need to be told twice. They quickly turned around and started to make their way back. But as they walked, they began to realize that this place was not like the forest they had known. The trees were twisted and gnarled, and the air was thick with a sense of malevolence. They could hear things moving in the darkness, things that they couldn't see. They quickened their pace, but the path seemed to go on forever. They were lost in a maze of darkness and terror. Suddenly, they heard a sound that made their blood run cold. It was a low growling coming from behind them. They turned around and saw a pair of glowing eyes in the darkness. They didn't know what it was, but they knew it was something terrible. They started to run, but the creature was getting closer and closer. It was gaining on them, its growling getting louder and louder. They could feel its hot breath on their necks, and they knew they were done for. Just when they thought it was the end, they saw a light in the distance. They ran towards it, and as they got closer, they realized it was the well. They didn't know how it was possible, but they knew it was their only chance. They jumped in without hesitation, and as they fell, they could see the creature's glowing eyes staring back at them. They fell for what seemed like an eternity, but finally, they hit the bottom with a thud. They were back in the forest, and it was daylight. They looked around, and they couldn't believe it. They were back in the real world. They hugged each other tightly, relieved to be alive, but they knew that they would never forget the horrors they had faced in that forest. The spirits, the creatures, and the unknown force that had saved them would haunt their dreams forever. They made a promise to each other that they would never speak of that night again, and they never did. But they knew that somewhere deep in the forest, the spirits were still waiting for their next unsuspecting victims. As the friends walked away from the forest, they couldn't shake the feeling that they were being watched. They kept looking over their shoulders, but they saw nothing. They tried to convince themselves that it was just their imagination, but they couldn't shake the feeling of unease. As they were about to leave the forest, they saw a figure in the distance, standing among the trees. It was a girl, with long black hair and a pale face. She was staring at them with a blank expression, and they couldn't tell if she was real or a ghost. She didn't move, and she didn't speak. The friends were hesitant to approach her, but they knew they had to find out who she was. As they got closer, they noticed that her clothes were old and tattered, and her skin was cold to the touch. They asked her if she was okay, but she didn't respond. She just stared at them with empty eyes. Suddenly, the girl began to speak in a language they couldn't understand. Her voice was cold and menacing, and it sent shivers down their spine. She kept repeating the same phrase over and over again, and they knew she was warning them of something. The friends didn't know what to do. They were afraid of the girl, and they didn't want to stay in the forest any longer. They turned around and started to run, but they could still hear the girl's voice behind them. They could hear her laughter, and it was the most terrifying sound they had ever heard. They didn't stop running until they reached the edge of the forest. They looked back, but the girl was nowhere to be seen. They were relieved that they had escaped, but they knew that the memory of the girl would stay with them forever. They never spoke of the girl again, but they knew that she was connected to the spirits and the horrors they had faced in the forest. They couldn't shake the feeling that she was still watching them, even though they were far away from the forest. They knew that the forest and the girl were a part of their past, but they would never be truly free from the terror that they had faced that night. And so the friends left the forest, never to return again. But the memory of that night stayed with them for the rest of their lives, a constant reminder of the horrors that lurked in the darkness and the terrifying girl who had warned them of the danger that still lurked in the forest. They knew that they would never be truly free from the terror that they had faced that night,